Mr. Bengesser. Nope.
There we go. I'm Matt Bengesser with the Attorney General's Office. Thank you for the opportunity to make a bill introduction today. Today, our office would like to introduce 24 RS 2713, an act modernizing and cleaning up the statutes for the Child Death Review Board.
Okay. Are there any questions? Okay. Is there any objection to requesting introduction? All right, seeing none, we will make that request. Thank you.
Chairwoman, thank you.
Andrea?
Andrea Warnke, on behalf of the Department of Children and Families, I'd like to request introduction for RS 2583, a bill regarding child fatality information sharing in KORAs.
Any questions? Any objection? Okay, thank you. We'll request introduction. Next item of business is I've given you a chance to read the minutes. The minutes of January 17th are the ones we're looking at now. Representative Neighbor.
I move approval of the January 17th minutes.
Okay, we've got a second from Representative Underhill. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. All right. The minutes are approved. Just as a reminder, the minutes for January 22nd and 24th have been posted on the S drive. Before we get started with our schedule today, I would like to ask Sister Therese she had a few comments that she would like to make to the committee. So you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Concanon. I said I would make these brief, so I want to do that. But this is a response to the Soul Bill. I had to leave during that, but I went back and read things that all the comments that people made, and I support the Soul Bill. I just want to say that one of the things that I'm a soul mom, and I tell people mom is not an honorary title. We walk the walk. My son is now 51 years old, who had a childhood no one should have had in the Kansas system. He taught me what it meant to belong to no one. And at 18, I began to just continue to interact with him after I'd been his child care worker. But I'm saying these young adults have a lot of things that they're going to need that, as all young adults do, but there's a whole other layer for them. So the first one probably is reliable transportation. So how do you get a car that really works? They're prey to people who can give you a high bill, and you don't know what you're talking about. He was always locking his keys in the car. I've learned through the years, I got him AAA. That was a big help for him. You have to teach children about taxes. You work, you have to do your taxes and to go through that. Credit cards can be a challenge for adults, but they're also a challenge where you haven't been taught about money. I said to him one time, the difference between you and I is that when I babysat for 25 cents an hour, I put it together for a bond to help me with my college education. That's very foreign because, anyway, in my experience, they have not had those experiences. Those ACEs that Dr. Bass gave you such an excellent, excellent presentation on, they follow these young people. They don't go away because you're 18 or you're 21 or you're 24. My son had a heart attack at 51. And the doctor said over and over, you've got to reduce your stress. You have to reduce your stress. Healthcare, then, is an issue. And I know a lot of people don't like to hear this, but racism is also an issue. And the children of color have another whole hurdle. What my son has taught me that racism never, ever, ever, ever ends. So I want to say that I'm not using the term child welfare anymore. I think we need to say family welfare. Because any time that we can help these families, and they might look to us like they don't care or they're doing all the wrong things, but any time we can help these families stabilize and we can assist them, then the children will fare well. And lastly, I would just say that I commend Senator Baumgardner, I think, was the mover, and Representative Concanon on the judicial conference that's going to be held in April. And I look forward to what they come up with around what are the ways that we can help stabilize families. And also with this SOL bill, look to the fact that at some point, it would seem to me you should be asked to put some resources into that bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we will now move into our scheduled agenda and have a presentation from the Kansas Child Death Review Board. Who's going first? Or both of you? Okay, so it's Jane and Sarah. Okay, the floor is yours.
Okay.
Is the mic on?
It's got a red. Is that on? Is that any better? Okay, okay. Good afternoon, Representative Concanon and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify regarding the continuing work of the Child State Death Review Board. My name is Jane Weiler. I serve as the chair, and this is the executive director, Sarah Hortenstein. She will have part of this just after me. As a brief overview, since 1994, the State Child Death Review Board has reviewed over 12,000 deaths of Kansas children or children from the state who have died within the Kansas borders. Ultimately, through our reviews, that we can begin to understand the key factors that are associated with child deaths so we can provide a basis for understanding when children are vulnerable or at risk and how the state can prevent future deaths of Kansas children. We appreciate the invitation to provide updates on our work as well as our findings before the committee. As you are aware, in 2021, there were several modifications to the state statute, specifically surrounding the circumstances in which the board can make disclosures of their findings. KSA 22A 243 now allows the board to disclose information to county and district attorneys, and this is for circumstances that would be when the board has determined there is information that was not previously available to the county or district attorney, and the disclosed information could assist with the prosecution of crimes related to the cause of the child's death. Since that time, the board has found 6 cases to which they have determined a disclosure to the entity was necessary. Modification also allowed for the board to disclose information to licensing bodies, such as the Board of Healing Arts, when a disclosure is related to a disciplinary complaint against a person licensed by that body. As a result, the board has found 9 cases to which we have determined a disclosure to the licensing body, such as the Board of Healing Arts, was necessary. The last update regarding the board's disclosure that I would like to share with you is regarding the ability to contract with government agencies and organizations that have a federal-wide assurance. Because of this update, we have been able to apply for CDC funding opportunities such as the Sudden Unexpected Infant Death Case Registry Grant, and to become a pilot site for the Drowning Death Scene Investigation Project offered through the National Center for Fatality Review. We are pleased to announce that the State Child Death Review Board was chosen as a recipient in both of these projects. Through these efforts and associated funding, the Attorney General's office has been able to hire an epidemiologist in the fall of 2023 and are actively collaborating with KDHE to host a coroner and medical legal death investigation conference in April of this year. In addition to these updates, we would like to discuss the board's findings related to child deaths that occurred in 2021. The following information that we are sharing with you comes directly from the 2023 annual report, which was submitted to the governor and it made it available to the public in September 2023. This report can be a bit overwhelming. It contains a large volume of data, prevention points, and recommendations for the child deaths in Kansas. Now, I believe the report is worth a read, but Sarah and I will do our best to walk through a few of the high levels that, related to certain manners and mechanisms of death. And we have provided the committee with both electronic and a paper copy. And if you should wish to review following along with us, but you also have that at your leisure to review. But overall, in 2021, Kansas experienced 349 child fatalities, which is the most recent year for the data that we have available. Overall, the rate of death for children between the ages of 0 to 17 has shown a decline in the past 5 reporting years. This year, it was a rate of death for 49.6 deaths per 100,000 population. Males accounted for more deaths in nearly all age groups, comprised about 60% of all the deaths in 2021. This is pretty consistent with all of the previous reporting years. The rate of death by race ethnicity for multiple groupings of death in the combined years of 2017 to 2021 indicated that Black non-Hispanic children have a rate of death higher than the Kansas rate of all categories except in suicides. Disparities are seen in all race ethnicity groups except for the white non-Hispanics who died at a lower rate or the same as the overall Kansas rate. Now, when looking at the manner of death, in 2021, Kansas experienced 11 drug-related deaths in children between the age of 0 to 17. Drug-related deaths are classified as when the decedent's death was due to an overdose of illicit drugs, prescription drugs, or over-the-counter drugs. Drug-related deaths have shown a significant increase in the past 2 years, with 20 times more deaths from fentanyl in 2020 and 2021 than there were the 3 years previously combined. On the drug-related deaths occurring between 2017 and 2021, the majority are unintentional in nature. The board provides quite a bit of information related to this topic, which can be found on page 74 in the report. Weapon-related deaths, specifically firearm deaths, have nearly doubled over the last 5 reporting years. In 2021, there were 44 firearm deaths, which means that more than 44 children died from firearms in 2021 than from injuries sustained in motor vehicle crashes. Fatal firearms injuries can include homicide, suicide, and accidental deaths, which can occur if a child is playing with a firearm or someone discharges a firearm without evidence of intentional harm. There are also circumstances in which firearms deaths are a result of interpersonal violence, such as domestic violence or legal intervention by law enforcement. Other times, the intent of the firearm use cannot be determined, and there's not enough information to know if the injury was intentionally self-inflicted, unintentional, or an act of interpersonal violence. In this section of the report, beginning on page 79, the board can also look at the regions in the state that experience the highest rate of firearm deaths, if that was of an interest to the committee. And now I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Thank you. To follow up with our findings, in terms of natural deaths, which can be found starting on page 27 of the report, I am pleased to announce that the rate of death due to natural causes such as prematurity, congenital conditions, cancer, and other diseases has shown a downward trend, with more than 100 fewer children dying of natural causes in 2021 compared to 2018. Beginning on page 33 of this report, we provide information related to unintentional injury deaths. While the rate of death due to unintentional injuries such as motor vehicle crashes, drownings, fires, etc., has remained stable the past 5 reporting years, in 2021 alone, there were 80 unintentional injury deaths. As each of these deaths were preventable, we find that this section of the report can be very eye-opening to parents and caregivers, the public, and to those that work in injury prevention. In regards to youth suicide, which begins on page 60 of the report, we have included additional information at the request of this committee, to which you can now see our findings related to race, sexual orientation, and gender identity. Overall, we found that the rate of death due to suicide has shown a downward trend since 2018, when both the Kansas and the U.S. death rate for youth suicides peaked. In 2021, there were 29 youth suicides, which is an increased number and rate from the previous reporting year in 2020, when there were 4 fewer deaths. Between the years of 2017 and 2021, 69% of the suicide deaths were male. In total, 63% of the youth who died by suicide communicated suicidal thoughts, actions, or intent prior to their death. 48% had recent school problems, and 16% had a history of alcohol or substance use concerns. This section of the report has a significant amount of information, including multiple suggestions for prevention. When we look at child homicides, which are death caused by intentional acts, unintentional acts, or criminally negligent acts leading to the death of another human being, we found that the rate of death, which was relatively stable from 2017 to 2020, showed a fairly significant increase in 2021, when there were 32 child homicides. This is compared to only 22 child homicides in 2020. To further expand on this topic, the board found that in 2021, males accounted for 71% of child homicides. Black, non-Hispanic children died at a rate of 14.9 deaths per 100,000 population, and this is compared to the Kansas death rate being only 3.3 deaths per 100,000 children when all races and ethnicities were combined.
Sarah, what page is the homicide? Where does that start?
It would be around page 50, I believe.
Okay, thanks. Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. In 4 of the 32 homicides, the board found sufficient evidence after thorough review to classify the deaths as homicides, even though they were not originally classified in that manner of death on the death certificate. 1 of those deaths had been certified as an accident, and the other 3 had been certified as undetermined. In terms of child abuse homicides, which we have a subsection in our report that begins on page 55, we indicate that while the number of child abuse homicides has been decreasing over the last 5 years, the board is still highlighting the need for thorough and complete investigations when there are reports of child abuse and neglect. We offer an example of one said case in our vignette on page 57. In this case, we discuss an infant who at 1 month of age was seen at a doctor's visit and was noted to have a small bruise on the abdomen. The caregiver provided an explanation of that bruise, and no further action was taken. At the infant's next visit at 2 months of age, the infant was described by the caregiver as crying a lot and was reported to have trouble sleeping at night. When we fast forward a few months to the day of the incident that led to this infant's death, we learned that the father was caring for the infant while the mother worked. EMS was called to the home as the father reported a choking event. EMS found the infant limp and unresponsive. At the hospital, the infant was found to have multiple bilateral rib fractures in various states of healing. The infant was also found to have subdural hemorrhages and extensive brain swelling, all of which are indicative of abusive head trauma. The infant died from those injuries, and the father later admitted to law enforcement that he had shaken the baby out of frustration. Throughout the report, we try to relay that it is not uncommon for parents' statements about a previous or current injury to a child to be taken at face value without attempting to corroborate that statement. Statistically, a parent or someone close to that parent is most frequently the perpetrator of abuse. By failing to interview collateral witnesses, review the family history, consult with others who have contact with the child, and obtain medical evaluations, some Kansas children are remaining in dangerous situations that unfortunately have too often caused their death, even after concerns about the child or their siblings has been reported to professionals. Some recent cases have been covered extensively in the media. However, it should not be assumed that all such cases receive the same high level of media attention. In 2021 alone, 4 out of the 5 child abuse homicides had DCF history with the family, many of which had very concerning history. In recent years, the board has begun to include a more thorough reporting of the child welfare system in Kansas as it relates to our child fatalities. I'd like to direct you all to page 11 of our report, where we discuss this topic specifically. As you can see on page 11, specifically in figure 6, of the 1,074 child fatalities reviewed by the board between 2019 and 2021, 36%, or 392 of those children who passed away had a history with the child welfare system, specifically with the Department for Children and Families Division of Child Protective Services. Figure 7 on that same page describes more about what that history with the family looked like. When we look at the number of families where the decedent or the sibling had been removed from the home prior to death, that accounted for 115 of the 392 cases. We can also see in that same chart that 61 of those families had an open CPS case at the time of death, with 28 of those children being in the custody of the state at the time of their death. When we look at figure 8 on the next page, this graphic is showing us CPS involvement with the family prior to death, but it pulls forward information related to the type of death that child experienced. As you can see, while 36% of all child fatalities had involvement with CPS prior to death, when you exclude the natural manners of death and look at the percentage of children who had CPS involvement, that percentage rose to 51%, again, when the natural deaths were excluded. When you look at just homicide deaths during that same time frame, the number rises to 69% who had CPS involvement with the family prior to death. Data such as this shows us that our social welfare system is directly connected to the potential prevention of child fatalities in our state. In 2016, the Commission to Eliminate Child Abuse and Neglect Fatalities published a national report entitled Within Our Reach, which focuses on child welfare system changes that could be led to reduce and prevent child abuse and neglect deaths. Consistent with our research and findings, data from the State Child Death Review Board supports the following. Infants and toddlers are at a higher risk of abuse or neglect fatalities compared to other age groups. A call to a child protection reporting center, regardless of the disposition, is the best predictor of a later child abuse or neglect fatality, and that the importance of child protection workers' access to real-time information about families cannot be overstated. The board includes 2 examples of child deaths in Kansas that had child welfare involvement within our vignette on page 13. We have included these real-life examples throughout our report as a way to illustrate the importance of several of our public policy recommendations that we share beginning on page 88 of the report. Some of those public policy recommendations we specified to prevent child abuse and neglect deaths include increased access to affordable, high-quality child care, enhancing training and access to appropriate information for child welfare professionals, adopting and consistently following best practice approaches regarding the investigation of all allegations of abuse and neglect, and improving the reporting of child abuse and neglect altogether. The public policy section of this report also lists several recommendations to prevent youth suicide, unintentional injury deaths, as well as sleep-related deaths. The board strongly encourages the members of the state legislature to consider each of these public policy recommendations beginning on page 88 of our report during the 2024 legislative session. The board has prioritized further statutory modifications to KSA 22A, 242, and 243 as needed for the State Child Death Review Board to continue the work they do. These requests were submitted today during bill requests in the form of RS 2713. We would be happy to share more about this bill or stand for questions as the committee sees fit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the data represented in here is from 2021. Is that correct?
Correct. Our 2023 report contains any deaths that occurred in 2021 of Kansas children aged 0 to 17 who died in Kansas or were residents of Kansas at the time of their death outside of the state.
Okay. I know that we've asked this before, but I can't remember the answer. I was anticipating the 2023 report would have 2022. Why the lag time?
That is a great question. So the board primarily investigates these child deaths through records. And as you could imagine, when you have open homicides, suicides, those investigations take a while. Autopsy findings can take 6 months or more. So to get a full year of data and have the adequate time for law enforcement to investigate all those circumstances and findings, it puts us very narrowly to be able to get the 2021 data to you by the deadline of October 1st of the subsequent year. So.
Okay. Also, I had a question on the vignettes. Are those real stories that happened in Kansas?
Yes, they have been de-identified, but we've left certain topics of prevention so that you can put a story to why our data makes a difference. Every piece of data has a face behind it, and these are our way of describing those to you.
Okay, I have one more thing that is a correction.
Please.
Like I know anything about, on page 57, there under the board reflection, there's a reference to the CARE program.
Oh, yes.
So I just wanted to bring it to your attention that that's not just for pediatricians. It's all primary care. So we are hitting all of the rural parts of Kansas who don't have a pediatrician. Yeah, we have a report coming up within the next couple of weeks from this program, and they'll talk about how many primary care, nurse practitioners, PAs that have been trained. So it's even better than what it says here.
You're right. That clarification should be changed. I appreciate that, okay. Representative Concanon.
Committee, do we have any questions? Oh, Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is my 4th year, and once we started working with this is one of the best documents that this state has ever done for child deaths. And we have to continue to support this, just as we did with the CARE and the other programs. I take these back and share them with my law enforcement friends back in Kansas City and that area, so that everybody gets these. These are real stories, trust me. I did too long in that business. I appreciate everything that you are doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Ousley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maybe not so much a question. You know, your vignette on page 13, your deaths with child welfare involvement. That first story there, that first example, it gives me hesitation. I don't know if you've paid attention in this committee when I've brought up recently learning that Texas has ceased removal except emergency situations as far as removing kids from their home into state custody. And like that number one, that story there is what gives me pause. But then just across the page on, 12, when you take out the natural causes and you look at the percentages of kids with CPS involvement, it's like that's with us removing for non-abuse neglect. I don't know. I just wanted to bring it to the committee's attention that as we have these discussions and as other states, experiment. Keep this into consideration. And any comment you got on that, I'd welcome. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, to clarify Figure 8, the reason we pull forward some of that information is primarily most natural causes of death are not preventable in nature. These would be premature births or cancer. And so while it's only 36% overall, when you take out the non-preventable deaths and we see how much the percentage of families who had CPS involvement compared to those deaths rises, that just shows you that preventable deaths tend to have involvement with the child welfare system, and that is a unique opportunity for those families to get support, to get help, and to get resources to keep the family together, and when appropriate, keep the child from harm.
And maybe a hypothetical question. So what are we preventing then? If we're still removing the kids, for abuse and neglect, and these are still preventable, deaths that we have the data in front of us. And again, hypothetical, but thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Humphreys.
Just to clarify, it's CPS involvement, not children that have been removed from the home.
That is
right. So it could be just family services. So those children have not necessarily been removed from the home, right? I mean, that's what I understand.
Correct. And if you look at Figure 7, you can see how many children and what their age groups were when they were removed from the home that died while in state's custody. But you are correct. These do include deaths of children who have been removed and have been remaining in the home at the time of death. It's all inclusive.
That's helpful.
Representative Howerton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just looking at these charts in the back by county.
Yes.
Looking specifically at my county, Sedgwick. The undetermined category, can you define that a little bit for me? Is it undetermined because you didn't have enough records, or is it undetermined because
Yes.
you don't know?
Sure. Yeah. So undetermined death, that is a manner of death. And those are situations where maybe there is not enough information to determine what cause of death it was, or sometimes we have equivocal information. So an example I like to use is maybe an overdose death. We can know with certainty that a child died from drug toxicity or an overdose, but without understanding the intent behind that child's overdose, that is what makes the manner of death. So if the child was to have taken that unintentionally and passed away, that would be an unintentional injury overdose. If the child intentionally took those drugs to take their life, that would be a suicide. And sometimes when we don't have enough information, or there was information that could lead us to believe that it was maybe a suicide or maybe unintentional, that is when maybe the board would determine that this is an undetermined death. So that is the reasoning for those.
Okay, so that's your opinion after looking at that. That's what you determined.
It's both something that is listed on a death certificate. So a death certificate can certify a death as natural, accident, homicide, suicide, or undetermined. The board can also classify with any of those manners of death, even if we may disagree with what was certified on the death certificate.
Is there any breakout of that, like a subcategories of?
Yes, actually. We have a whole section on undetermined deaths in our report. Something you will notice when you look at our undetermined deaths on page 69. These, again, are deaths that we may not have enough information on, or that maybe we could not determine if it was an accident or a suicide. But also, these do include some of our sudden unexplained infant deaths. These are sleeping-related deaths under the age of 1. By nature of some of these deaths, those will be defined with the manner as undetermined, both on the death certificate and within our reporting. You're welcome.
Sarah, on the recommendations, public policy recommendations, I'm on page 88. Are they in order of priority, or?
They are not in order of priority. They are just primarily by type of death and placement.
Okay. And I obviously haven't had a chance to really read them, but when just skimming them, I don't see any specific legislative request that you, or recommendation that you have for us. Do you have those on each topic, or?
Sure. So we try to leave the public policy recommendation as a useful tool to agencies, the legislature, anyone who may read it. We hope that some of the language and wording in here could prompt you as you work other bills or as you have ideas for other ways of prevention. We do not explicitly come out with a specific recommendation for those. Now, in cases where we have prioritized a need, we will document what specific legislative recommendations we are requesting, and those are found usually in our legislative priority section, which for this annual report is on page 4. Where we do give specific recommendations to statutory modifications this year to the Child Death Review Board, as well as statutory modifications to child care licensing laws.
Okay. Do we have other questions? Representative Wagner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a real helpful report, very, very super interesting. I'm wondering, I see you do breakdowns based by race. Do you do breakdowns based on like federal poverty level or economic factors? Is there a breakdown someplace for that?
That is an excellent question. Thank you. The board is able to provide data if we can receive those in the records. And as someone who's reviewed these deaths for nearly 9 years, truly understanding the level of financial limitations or anything related to poverty is very hard to identify in some of the records that we receive. So we are not able to have enough information to provide valuable data in the report related to that.
The question has come up on page 11 and 12 about the child welfare involvement of these children who died. Just to clarify, if I'm reading it correctly, so, you know, Child Protective Services in total, of course, doesn't mean they've been placed in foster care. But in figure 7, I'm taking it for the decedent in custody at time of death. Those were kids who literally were in foster care when they died. Is that correct?
Correct. They could be in foster care. They could be on the run, but placed in state custody. Yes.
Okay. Then the above category of removal of sibling or decedent prior to death meant that one of their brothers or sisters had been removed, but not them? Or what is that grouping?
That is an excellent question. I'm glad you asked that. So what that means is that prior to the date of death for this child, so that means that that specific child or their sibling had been removed at some point prior to their death, with the majority of them being placed back in the home at the time of their death. So that number just displays that there was CPS history that was significant enough for that removal for either them or their sibling, and then they later died.
Then, I mean, given the fact there's roughly, 6,000 kids in foster care at this point, and of course, I mean, over their lifetime, obviously more than that many kids. But do you guys ever do like a percentage, breakdown? I mean, the amount of kids who die in foster care versus maybe similarly situated, socioeconomically kids, as far as death rates? I mean, is that ever done, or is that too hard to do, or what?
That's a unique question. Specifically in terms of poverty rate, that would be difficult for us to do. I can think about your question a little bit more. I am the main author of this report, and I always take some of these questions to heart and think of ways that I could do that. So at this time, I can't think of a way that we produce that in this report, but I can look forward and see if that's an option for later.
The question about deaths and child care deaths back in 72 and 73. So basically, you had 17 in figure 71, 17 child care setting deaths from 2017 to 2021. And so just for clarification, so basically the main deaths are for kids age 1 and under, and it's all sleep-related deaths? Is that just, and is it unsafe sleeping practices? It's just, is that, am I?
Yes, you are primarily talking about that. So yes, we obviously know that younger children are more likely to be in a child care home. So it would not be abnormal that we would see just young numbers or young ages for that type of death. But yes, with our under 1 population, unsafe sleep practices in that child care home, whether that was a licensed facility or an unlicensed facility, or maybe a licensed facility that was not in compliance, that is a majority of our under 1 deaths that occur in child care homes and centers.
If I follow, just, the ones that weren't sleep-related, it said 3 of the 5 deaths were due to natural causes. I mean, like, what, like, just some kid just drops over dead, or like, what was, I don't get it. It wasn't an accident, it was just...
Yeah, so there are many times when a child could have medical complications throughout their life that could result in a death that was of no relation to that child care provider's work and what they did. I wouldn't be able to give you the specifics of those details at this time, but I could tell you that that there are many medical conditions where a child could pass away at any given time, whether they're in the care of their parents or a child care center.
If the remaining 2 deaths were unintentional injuries due to asphyxia, so like, these weren't babies, they were like... I mean, a kid put a plastic bag over their head, or what did how do they die from, they choke on, I don't.
So both children under the age of 1 and over the age of 1 can die from asphyxia, suffocation, or strangulation in a sleep environment. If there was, asphyxia could also be some of the things that you're mentioning, but it would not just be children over the age of 1. There could be children under the age of 1 and over the age of 1 where that could happen to them. But some could, yes, be sleeping-related deaths.
But in your report, it says the 5 that were not sleep-related, the 2 of them were unintentional injury deaths due to asphyxia. So again, this would be a plastic bag, like they got some around their neck. I mean, I don't know.
Yes,
how do
someone could be entrapped with a cord, a rope, a blind. We do have a specific asphyxia section where we talk about some of the different ways that children over the age of 1 have died due to asphyxiation. Some of those could have applied with those child care deaths that you're referencing.
Thank you for your attention.
Welcome.
Any other? Representative Lewis.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I wanted to ask a couple questions about reporting. On page 90, you say that we need to improve reporting of child abuse and neglect. And you talk about 2 categories of reporters, mandated reporters and those who aren't mandated reporters but are just concerned. Do you have any recommendations as to whether we should expand the list of mandated reporters?
Yes, that is a very good question. Many times I have thought of different ways that we could somehow impress upon society that all of us should be mandated reporters, that each and every one of us have an obligation to a child, that if we see something, we say something. So any additions to that statutory modifications that would require other people to be mandated professionals is something that I would explore and look towards.
Just to follow up, so the last sentence in this section says there are several instances each year where mandated reporters and concerned citizens had information that could have saved the life of a child had the information been reported prior to the death. From looking at the data that you have on mandated reporters, are there any particular types of mandated reporters that more often than not are the ones that aren't reporting? Because I know there's a list of, I don't know, 15 or 20 different.
Yeah, I couldn't say with exact certainty how many of those are with what profession or what mandated requirement.
Could I?
Yeah, please.
Actually, understand what you're asking, Representative Luce. One thing, when I was with the Attorney General's office, I was litigation counsel to a lot of small agencies. And the mandated reporter came up a lot because the law as it's written right now has a few holes in it. Individuals who are licensed by the Behavioral Science Board or social workers, psychologists, marriage and family therapists, the way it's written, it leads to the profession believing that they are always a mandated reporter, even if they're off duty, which I think kind of echoes with what Sarah was saying, is we should all be mandated reporters. And so they are very diligent about making the reports. Whereas the other professions like a medical doctor or a dentist, the way the statute reads, it appears they're only mandated while on duty. And so the statute in itself kind of had a lot of inconsistencies. So I know with some of the agencies that I worked with was frustrated with that particular. So it is some of the language in that.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
Representative Carr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And you probably went over this, and I just can't see it when I try to go back and look at it on the chart. But with respect to the breakdown based on race and ethnicity, am I missing the part that shows the age breakdown as well with respect to like the infant mortality rate versus any other child that would be in care? Is this on the chart somewhere, or?
That is an excellent question. As I look for the answer to see if we specifically give that for infants, I will say that as we start breaking down deaths into smaller categories, such as infants or by manner of death, we have fewer numbers to work with. And the fewer numbers that we have to work with, the less stable our rates of death can be and can sometimes be misleading. So we do try to be very compliant with different algorithms to make sure that we're reporting out good information and prevention. So let me check here for our infant deaths. Oh, yes. Well, so you can see on figure 23, we have sleep-related rate of death. These are children under the age of 1. On page 22, where we do provide a rate of death for these types of deaths. There are some suppression that was occurring within that chart, though. So that is one figure where we show under age of 1 rate of death by race and ethnicity.
And at what age, or what are we considering infancy? Up to?
Yes, so this would be any death that occurs before the child's first birthday. And I also did just locate figure 15 on page 16 does give the rate of death per 1,000 live births by race and ethnicity for all children who are under the age of 1 at the time of their death.
Thank you.
Representative Ousley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for including that information. I had written down Adrian's Law here as we're talking about mandated reporters. And then on page 77, I'm seeing the county breakdown, and it reminded me to ask how the Wyandotte County Board is doing.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Representative Ousley. Jane and I have worked very closely with the Wyandotte County Youth Fatality Review Board this past year. They are doing well. They're still reviewing cases. They're currently actually looking at different ways to maybe modify the way that they're doing things just to be compliant with different COMA laws and how they can work within the State Child Death Review Board. So I do feel that they are faring well.
And the collaboration is going well. We're not seeing any issues as far as the information sharing, what's able to be?
Yeah, so to be completely honest, the same concerns that the State Child Death Review Board had after this bill was introduced are still applicable. while the board applauds the interest and work of the Wyandotte County Youth Fatality Review Board, we may release information to that local fatality review team, but if we do, we are most likely violating the statutory provisions, which requires that the board shall still maintain that information confidentially. So as the Wyandotte County team does not have the same provisions that allow confidentiality of those records once they're received by the state team, we are unable to provide that to them. Now, with that being said, the Wyandotte Fatality Review Team has done the reviews of their cases quite well without the assistance of those records or information from the state team.
Thank you for that update.
You're welcome.
Representative Carr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry. I have one follow-up. As I look at figure 15, and I look at the rate of death per 1,000. If I move over to the category of multiple race non-Hispanic, am I correct? Is that 16?
Were you on page 16, sir?
Page 16, figure 15.
Yes. So multiple race non-Hispanic means that that child could have one or more race, which would put them in the multiple race category. And that is a rate of, meaning that if a child is more than one race and non-Hispanic, that of 1,000 live births, it would be anticipated that 16 of those children that are multiple race non-Hispanic would pass away.
So do we have a reason for that? That's considerably higher than any other group listed. Do we know what kind of factors attribute to that?
The disparity that you're mentioning is something that we see at a state level in this state and many other states. Racial disparities do exist, and there is high disparities when we look at our infant populations here in Kansas and elsewhere. Lots of this does have to do with what we could assume is poverty, access to resources, support, access to health care, insurance, appropriate prenatal care, just many factors that have caused a disproportionate amount of deaths for that race.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Representative Harrington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to ask this. Do you track the children that were in foster care when they died? Do you track what agencies or providers?
You're asking for like the subcontractor who would have been providing those services. We do not have a spot within our database where we collect that information, that specific information is tracked for me to report out.
I think that would be good to see if there's an issue that's recurring, I guess, maybe.
I think DCF probably would have that information because they would know of a death if it happened. And we can ask. Any other questions? Okay. Sarah, when you were in my office the other day, you expressed some appreciation for this committee, and I was just wondering if you would share with them, that the appreciation of having a committee to report to, because this is a tough topic and not everyone wants to hear it.
Yeah, I can't thank this committee enough. You've brought a voice to some of the data that was silenced for a long time and just not well known to the public. So I really thank you, Representative Concanon and Representative Ousley, Representative Johnson, for championing some of that information. I can say that many of the bills that are brought forward to this committee are so impactful to the children. Families First has been amazing for Kansas. I'm excited to see what the Sole Permanency Bill brings to Kansas and a voice and support that we can bring to Kansas children. I'm just very appreciative of the work that you see. It's hard, it's tough. We see it day in and day out, and it's nice to be amongst people who are doing the same amount of work and have the same amount of devotion to children in Kansas. So thank you all.
And thank you for the work you do. It's a tough topic. And did you say you were part of the sole team?
No. So I sit on the custody to transition and intake to petition panel that is facilitated through the Department for Children and Families, where this permanency option has been explored with both of those committees, and we've learned from that group and been applauding them on their way as they find a voice in Kansas. So,
Well, thank you. We thought they were pretty great. So,
yes.
Okay. Anything else? All right. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too. Okay, committee, that's all we have for today. We will hear House Bill 2581 and 2580 on Wednesday. So with that, we're adjourned.